You're looking to understand the forces shaping our world, maybe go beyond the headlines a bit, and connect the dots.
Yeah, that's exactly what we try to do. Focus on one event to get at the bigger picture.
And today, that event is Russia's Victory Day Parade,
Ah.
Moscow, May 9th, 2025. It was the big one, the 80th anniversary of the Allied victory in Europe, World War II.
A very significant anniversary.
We've got analysis here from the World Politics Review and also some reporting from BBC News. They help paint, well, a much richer picture than just, seeing tanks roll by.
Absolutely.
So our mission today is to really dig into what this specific parade tells us about Russia's place in the world right now. Its relationships, its standing.
Exactly. It's always a carefully staged event, isn't it? There's a message there for people at home and for the world.
So let's start with the event itself. Putin naturally presiding in Red Square, 80 years since the end of the war in Europe. And the BBC, right off the bat, mentioned tight security.
Tight security.
What does that little detail signal to you?
Well, it could mean a few things. Maybe a heightened sensitivity to potential trouble, or just reflecting the general, geopolitical tension that exists.
Makes sense.
But maybe more revealing, I think, is who actually showed up. The World Politics Review really dives into the guest list.
Right, the attendees.
Yeah.
Apparently this year saw more foreign leaders than they've had in a while. Since 2015, maybe?
Yeah, the most since 2015. At least 24, they said.
24. So why is that further important? What's the thinking there?
Well, it kind of suggests Russia is pushing back against this narrative that they're isolated, trying to show they still have international partners.
Okay.
And the names are interesting, too. You had Xi Jinping from China, and they had talks just the day before, which is key.
Right.
Then there was Lula from Brazil, leaders from new BRICS members like Egypt, Ethiopia, and others from the Global South, too, Vietnam, Burkina Faso. Quite a list.
What about India? I thought PM Modi was planning to attend.
He was, yeah. But that visit was canceled. The sources don't really spell out exactly why. But, India is always performing this complex balancing act, isn't it? Dealing with the West, dealing with Russia. So his accents, even without an official reason, you could maybe read something into that, managing those ties carefully.
Interesting point. Okay, let's focus on China for a moment. World Politics Review called Xi the most important guest. Why single him out?
Well, it's not just symbolic. They highlight how China, facing its own sort of economic pressures, maybe from those earlier trade issues, potentially comes to this relationship with a bit more leverage now.
More leverage. How might that play out?
Could affect future deals, trade agreements, maybe even how they align on, global issues. And then there was that joint statement they put out.
Ah, yes. The one critical of the U.S.
Exactly. Criticizing the U.S., pledging to counter what they call dual containment. It really underlines a pretty significant strategic alignment between them.
Could you just quickly unpack dual containment for us? What's meant by that?
Sure. Basically, it's this idea from their perspective that the U.S. is actively trying to limit the influence and growth of both Russia and China on the world stage. So the statement is them saying, we see this and we're pushing back together.
Got it. So quite a statement of intent. Now, beyond China, you mentioned BRICS leaders, others from the Global South. Lula's presence seems quite notable, especially if there have been disagreements within BRICS itself.
Yes, exactly. His being there, even with those, let's say, internal BRICS discussions happening, it kind of shows that the bloc, including the newer members like Egypt and Ethiopia, is still a really important stage for Russia.
A key platform for engagement outside the West.
Precisely. And seeing leaders from Vietnam, Burkina Faso, and others, it shows Russia is still actively working those relationships across the Global South, projecting that global reach.
But the World Politics Review throws a bit of cold water on that, doesn't it? It suggests that while the turnout looks good, maybe it's not the win against Western isolation efforts it first appears to be.
Yeah, they offer a more nuanced take. That first impression might be misleading.
How so?
Well, their analysis points out that if you take China out of the equation for a second, many of the other influential leaders who attended actually have stronger ties, economic, diplomatic, with the West than they do with Moscow.
Ah, okay. So the pictures of leaders in Moscow look one way, but the underlying reality, the substance of those relationships, might be different.
Exactly. The actual benefits Russia gets from some of these partnerships, beyond just, looking less isolated, might be fairly limited.
Which kind of leads us to Putin's goals, right?
Right.
Both domestically and internationally.
Right. Both sources agree, really, that Victory Day has been a huge domestic propaganda tool for Putin for, well, over a decade, projecting strength, history,
And the BBC really hit on how that symbolism ramped up after the 2022 invasion of Ukraine, specifically mentioning Putin's rhetoric, linking the war in Ukraine to fighting Nazis in World War II.
Yes, those false claims, as the BBC notes. He apparently repeated that theme during the parade itself. It's a narrative aimed squarely at his domestic audience.
So you have that domestic angle, and then you combine it with this big international guest list.
And it seems pretty clear Putin was trying to project this image of, strong international support, directly challenging that narrative of Russia being a pariah state.
But then there's the economy. World Politics Review brings that up, the headwinds Russia's facing, sanctions, oil price issues.
Economic reality bites. And the analysis suggests that China, despite the closeness, probably can't just fix all that for Russia.
Why not?
Well, China has its own economic considerations, its own pressures. So the idea that Beijing can or will fully offset the impact of Western sanctions, it's probably unlikely, at least beyond a certain point.
So we get this big symbolic parade, lots of international faces, but underneath, it's a much more complex picture. Shifting alliances, real economic constraints, maybe varying levels of actual commitment from those guests.
It really makes you question the depth and the staying power of some of these partnerships.
Okay, let's try and pull these threads together then. Russia's 2025 Victory Day parade. Yes, it drew a significant number of foreign leaders, especially from BRICS in the Global South. Looks like a counter to isolation.
But when you dig deeper, the picture gets murky. China's role is obviously huge, central even, but likely driven by its own strategic needs too.
And for many other attendees, their presence might be more about maintaining options or symbolic gestures than some deep anti-Western alignment, especially given their ties elsewhere.
All while Russia itself is dealing with serious economic challenges that even its closest partners, like China, might not be able to fully solve.
So it leaves us, and you, the listener, with something to think about. Considering these economic realities for both Russia and China, how might this alliance or partnership actually evolve? What does it look like in practice, beyond the parades?
Yeah, what are the real-world implications for global geopolitics, perhaps the ones we don't see so clearly?
It's definitely a situation that's still developing, worth keeping a close eye on.